The afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the empty highway as John Cena cruised down the winding country road on his Harley-Davidson. The powerful engine hummed beneath him, vibrating through his chest as he leaned into the curves. This was his escape. No cameras, no crowds, no obligations. Just him, his bike, and miles of open asphalt stretching toward the horizon. The rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania looked peaceful in the late September light. Cornfields swayed gently in the breeze, and farmhouses dotted the landscape like scattered puzzle pieces. John breathed deeply, feeling the tension of his demanding schedule melt away with each passing mile. These solo rides had become sacred to him, a chance to reconnect with himself away from the spotlight that followed him everywhere. As he rounded a sharp bend, something made him slow down. His trained instincts, honed by years of professional wrestling and countless encounters with unpredictable situations, picked up on a disturbance ahead. The peaceful afternoon quiet was broken by harsh voices and the aggressive rumble of multiple motorcycle engines. John pulled to the side of the road behind a cluster of oak trees, cutting his engine to better assess the situation. What he saw made his blood run cold. A faded yellow school bus sat stranded in the middle of the narrow road, surrounded by 8 menacing motorcycles arranged in a threatening semicircle. The bikes were all black, their riders wearing leather vests adorned with patches that spoke of violence and territory. Through the bus windows, John could see small faces pressed against the glass. Children, probably between 6 and 12 years old, huddled together in terror. Some were crying, others sat frozen in shock. Behind the steering wheel, an elderly black man gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The bus driver's face showed a mixture of determination and fear as he tried to shield his young passengers from the nightmare unfolding around them. The bikers were taking turns approaching the bus, banging on the sides with baseball bats and tire irons. Their leader, a tall man with a distinctive wolf tattoo covering his neck, tapped the driver's side window with a steel crowbar, leaving scratches on the glass with each deliberate strike. The sound echoed like gunshots in the quiet countryside. "You're lost, old man," the leader shouted, his voice carrying clearly through the still air. "This road ain't for people like you. Consider this your only warning." John watched as one of the bikers, a shorter man with a scraggly beard, crouched beside the front tire and pulled out a hunting knife. With deliberate malice, he plunged the blade into the rubber, causing the tire to hiss as air escaped. The children's screams could be heard even through the closed bus windows. The bus driver tried to speak, but his words were drowned out by the biker's cruel laughter. John could see the man's lips moving, probably trying to explain that he was just following his regular route, taking kids home from school. But these weren't reasonable people. They were predators who fed on fear and power. Another biker slashed the second front tire, while others began rocking the bus from side to side. The children's terrified screams grew louder, and John saw several small hands pressed against the windows, reaching out desperately for help that seemed impossible to find. The leader climbed onto the hood of the bus, his boots leaving dents in the metal. He pointed the crowbar directly at the driver through the windshield. "You've got 30 seconds to figure out how to get these kids out of here on flat tires, or we're coming in after you," he threatened. John's jaw clenched as he witnessed the scene unfold. He'd seen bullying before, in schools, in the entertainment industry, even in his own childhood. But this was different. This was pure evil targeting the most innocent and vulnerable members of society. 8 grown men with weapons terrorizing children, and an elderly bus driver who was just trying to do his job. The driver's face showed the impossible choice he faced: stay and risk violence against the children, or somehow comply with the impossible demand to move a bus with slashed tires. The kids were depending on him, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. One little girl, probably 7 years old, had tears streaming down her face as she stared out the window. Her small hand was pressed against the glass, and John could see her mouth forming the word "help" over and over again. That image burned itself into his memory, igniting something deep within him. The bikers were getting more aggressive by the second. 2 of them had started trying to force open the emergency exit at the back of the bus, while others continued their intimidation tactics. The leader was counting down now, his voice growing more menacing with each number. John had seen enough. He couldn't stand by and watch innocent children be terrorized by these thugs. Every fiber of his being, everything he stood for, demanded action. He'd spent his career entertaining people, but he'd also spent it standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. This was no different. As he prepared to start his engine and intervene, John knew he was about to face odds that would challenge even his considerable skills. 8 against 1, all of them armed and clearly willing to use violence. But those children needed someone to stand between them and these monsters. And sometimes, John thought as he kicked his Harley back to life, being a hero meant accepting impossible odds. The rumble of his engine cut through the afternoon air like thunder, announcing that their reign of terror was about to meet its match. John's Harley roared to life, with a sound that cut through the bikers' laughter like a blade. Every head turned toward the approaching motorcycle as he accelerated down the road, his engine's deep rumble growing louder with each passing second. The bikers' confident sneers began to falter as they watched the lone rider approach, without showing any signs of slowing down or turning away. John brought his bike to a controlled stop about 20 feet from the semicircle of motorcycles, positioning himself strategically where he could see all the threats while keeping the bus behind him. He killed the engine and dismounted with deliberate calm, his movements fluid and purposeful. At 6 feet tall and 251 pounds of pure muscle, he cut an imposing figure even without his signature wrestling gear. The children in the bus had stopped screaming, their attention now focused on this unexpected arrival. Through the windows, John could see their faces pressed against the glass, hope flickering in their tear-stained eyes. The elderly bus driver had turned in his seat, watching with a mixture of relief and concern as this stranger prepared to face impossible odds. The biker leader climbed down from the bus hood, gripping his crowbar tighter as he studied the newcomer. "Well, well," he called out, his voice dripping with false bravado. "Looks like we've got ourselves a hero. You picked the wrong day to play Good Samaritan, friend." John's expression remained calm and controlled as he surveyed the scene. 8 bikers, all armed with various weapons, crowbars, baseball bats, chains, and knives. They'd formed a loose circle around him and the bus, clearly experienced in intimidation tactics. But John had faced worse odds in wrestling rings around the world, and more importantly, he'd faced real danger in his charitable work in conflict zones overseas. "Seems like 8 grown men need weapons to threaten an old man and some kids," John said, his voice carrying clearly across the road. "Where I come from, we call that cowardice." The shorter biker with the scraggly beard laughed harshly. "Big talk from one guy against all of us. You sure you want to do this?" John's gaze swept over each of them, cataloging their positions, their weapons, their body language. He could see the uncertainty creeping into some of their faces. They'd been expecting easy victims, not someone willing to stand and fight. "I'm sure," he replied simply. "The question is, are you sure you want to explain to everyone how 8 of you couldn't handle one unarmed man?" The leader's face flushed red with anger. "You don't know who you're messing with, tough guy. This is our territory. We run things here, and people like him." He pointed the crowbar toward the bus driver. "Need to learn their place." "The only thing I see here," John responded, taking a step forward, "is a bunch of bullies picking on people who can't fight back. That ends now." One of the bikers, a heavy-set man with tattoos covering his arms, swung a baseball bat in a lazy arc. "You're outnumbered 8-1, hero. Walk away now, and maybe you'll walk away at all." John's eyes never left the leader as he spoke. 8-1. I like those odds. Means I don't have to hold back." His voice carried a quiet confidence that made several of the bikers exchange uncertain glances. The leader raised his crowbar, trying to reassert his dominance over the situation. "Last chance, pretty boy. Turn around and ride away, or we'll make sure you regret ever stopping here." "I've got a better idea," John replied, his stance shifting slightly as his muscles coiled with potential energy. "Why don't you drop your weapons, get on your bikes, and leave these people alone? Then nobody has to get hurt." The bikers erupted in laughter, but it sounded forced now, lacking the cruel confidence they displayed moments earlier. The leader stepped closer, raising the crowbar threateningly. "You think you're some kind of superhero? This ain't the movies, friend. This is real life, and in real life, heroes get hurt." John's expression hardened. You're right. This isn't the movies. In the movies, the bad guys get second chances. He paused, his eyes locking with the leader's. You just used yours up. The tension in the air was electric. The children in the bus watched with wide eyes, sensing that something momentous was about to happen. The bus driver clutched his radio, ready to call for help if things went wrong. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Two of the bikers began moving to flank John, their weapons ready. But John had already noted their positions, already calculated angles and distances. His years of professional training had taught him to see an entire fight before the first punch was thrown. 8 weapons against one man with his bare hands, John said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. And you guys still look nervous. Wonder why that is. The leader's patience finally snapped. Enough talk. Take him down. But even as the words left his mouth, something in John's stance must have warned him that this wasn't going to go the way they'd planned. The way John stood, balanced, alert, completely unafraid despite the overwhelming odds, suggested a level of combat experience that went far beyond weekend bar fights. John rolled his shoulders once, loosening his muscles. I tried to do this the easy way, he said quietly. Now we do it my way. The first biker charged forward with his baseball bat raised high. John's response was swift and devastating. He sidestepped the swing, grabbed the man's wrist, and used his own momentum against him. With a fluid motion that looked almost effortless, John sent the attacker flying through the air to crash into one of the parked motorcycles. The sound of metal hitting metal rang out across the countryside, followed by an ominous silence as the remaining 7 bikers realized they might have made a serious mistake. John straightened up, completely calm, and looked at the leader with raised eyebrows. 7 left, he said conversationally. Anyone else want to try their luck? The real fight was about to begin. The sight of their companion sprawled unconscious beside a crumpled motorcycle sent shockwaves through the remaining bikers. What had seemed like an easy 8-on-1 beatdown was rapidly transforming into something far more dangerous. The leader's confident sneer wavered as he watched John dust off his hands with casual indifference, as if throwing a grown man 10 feet through the air was merely a warm-up exercise. What are you waiting for? The leader barked at his crew, though his voice cracked slightly. He's just one man. Rush him. 3 bikers responded immediately, charging from different angles. The first swung a heavy chain in a wide arc aimed at John's head. The second came in low with a knife, targeting his midsection. The third approached from behind, wielding a tire iron like a club. John's response was a masterclass in combat awareness and timing. He ducked under the chain, letting it whistle harmlessly over his head while simultaneously grabbing the wrist of the knife wielder. Using the man's forward momentum, John pivoted and sent him crashing into the chain swinger. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs and weapons. The third attacker, coming from behind with the tire iron, thought he had a clear shot at John's skull. But John had heard the footsteps on gravel and spun around just as the weapon descended. He caught the tire iron in mid-swing with his bare hand, the metallic clang echoing across the road. The biker's eyes widened in shock as John wrenched the weapon away and tossed it aside like a toy. You guys really need to work on your coordination, John said, before delivering a devastating uppercut that lifted the man off his feet and sent him crashing into the side of the school bus. The children inside gasped and cheered simultaneously, their fear beginning to transform into amazement. The bus driver, Marcus Williams, gripped his steering wheel and watched through his mirrors as this mysterious stranger dismantled the gang that had terrorized him and his students. He'd driven school buses for 37 years, through good neighborhoods and bad, but he'd never seen anything like this. 4 bikers remained standing, including their increasingly desperate leader. The wolf tattoo on the leader's neck seemed to pulse with his rapid heartbeat as he reassessed the situation. His gang's reputation was built on intimidation and overwhelming numbers, but this opponent was systematically neutralizing their advantages. Spread out more, the leader commanded. Make him divide his attention. The remaining bikers began circling John like wolves, but their movements were hesitant now, lacking the predatory confidence they displayed earlier. One of them, a younger man with multiple facial piercings, kept glancing toward his motorcycle as if calculating his chances of escape. John slowly turned in place, keeping all four opponents in view. His breathing was steady, his stance relaxed but ready. Years of professional wrestling had taught him to conserve energy during long matches, and this fight was far from over. "Last chance," John called out, his voice carrying easily across the road. "Drop your weapons and walk away. I won't offer again." The leader's response was to raise his crowbar and charge forward with a wild swing aimed at John's ribs. John sidestepped the attack and grabbed the leader's wrist, applying pressure to a nerve cluster he'd learned during his military training exercises. The crowbar dropped from nerveless fingers as the leader cried out in pain. But the other three bikers used their leader's attack as cover, rushing in from three sides simultaneously. This time their coordination was better, and John found himself dealing with multiple threats at once. A baseball bat swung toward his head while a chain whipped at his legs, and another knife thrust toward his back. John dropped low, sweeping his leg in a wide circle that caught two of the attackers behind the knees and sent them tumbling. He rolled backward to avoid the knife thrust, came up on his feet, and caught the baseball bat barehanded on its downward swing. The wooden weapon cracked under the force of his grip. "Impossible," whispered one of the fallen bikers, staring up at John with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The children in the bus were now pressed against every available window, watching the incredible display of skill and strength. 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez had stopped crying entirely, her mouth hanging open in amazement. "He's like a real-life superhero," she whispered to her seatmate. John helped the situation along by demonstrating just how superhuman he could appear. He grabbed the cracked baseball bat in both hands and snapped it cleanly in half, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot. Then he tossed the pieces aside and faced the three remaining threats. The younger biker with the facial piercings finally broke. "I'm out of here," he announced, stumbling toward his motorcycle. "This guy's not human." "Come back here, you coward," the leader shouted, clutching his injured wrist. But the young man was already kick-starting his bike and roaring away down the road, leaving his companions behind. Now it was 3 against 1, but the psychological advantage had shifted completely. The remaining bikers looked at their injured comrades, at the broken weapons scattered around the road, at John standing calmly in the center of it all without even breathing hard. Marcus Williams reached for his radio, finally remembering he could call for help. But as he began to dial, he hesitated. Part of him wanted to see how this incredible confrontation would end. This stranger had appeared like an answer to his prayers, and he was winning against impossible odds. The leader tried to rally his remaining men. "He's got to be getting tired. Keep hitting him from different angles." But his voice lacked conviction now, and his men could hear the doubt. John cracked his knuckles and smiled grimly. 3 left, he said. "This is where it gets interesting." What happened next would be talked about in the local community for years to come. The 2 remaining gang members looked at each other, looked at John, then looked at their leader. Without a word, they began backing toward their motorcycles. "Where do you think you're going?" the leader demanded, but he was shouting at empty air. His men had made their choice, and it wasn't loyalty. John watched the 2 bikers flee, then turned his full attention to the gang leader standing alone among the wreckage of his gang's reputation. The man was still dangerous, still armed with rage and desperation, but the odds had shifted dramatically. "Just you and me now," John said quietly, still feeling confident. The leader of the biker gang stood alone on the empty road, his world crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. 6 of his men lay groaning on the asphalt. 2 had fled like cowards, and their weapons were scattered uselessly across the pavement. The wolf tattoo on his neck, once a symbol of pack strength and intimidation, now seemed like a cruel joke as he faced his opponent alone. John Cena stepped over the debris of broken weapons and approached the gang leader with measured steps. There was no hurry in his movements, no wasted energy. He'd learned long ago that the final moments of any confrontation were often the most dangerous, when desperate men made desperate choices. "Your name," John said, his voice calm but commanding. "What is it?" The leader straightened, trying to summon the last remnants of his bravado. "Tommy Vega. And this isn't over, hero man. You don't know who you're messing with." "Actually, Tommy, I know exactly who I'm messing with," John replied, stopping just out of arm's reach. A bully who picks on children and elderly people. A coward who needs 7 other men and weapons to feel tough. The kind of person who makes the world a darker place. Tommy's face flushed red with humiliation and rage. Around him, his injured gang members were slowly picking themselves up, some limping toward their motorcycles, others still too dazed to move. The children in the bus watched through the windows with wide eyes, sensing that the climax of their nightmare was approaching. You think you're some kind of judge and jury? Tommy snarled, his fists clenching. You think you can just roll up and decide who's right and wrong? John's expression hardened. When I see 8 grown men terrorizing children, yeah, I think the right and wrong is pretty clear. Marcus Williams, the bus driver, had finally managed to get through to the police dispatcher. We need units on Highway 47, about 3 miles past Miller's Crossing. He whispered into his radio. There's been an incident, but I think it's being handled. Tommy reached into his jacket, and John tensed, ready to react. But instead of a weapon, Tommy pulled out a cell phone. You see this? He waved it in the air. I've got friends all over this county. More friends than you can handle. You might have one today, but you can't watch these people forever. The threat hung in the air like poison, and John felt his anger spike for the first time since the confrontation began. Threatening him was one thing, but threatening innocent people was another matter entirely. Let me explain something to you, Tommy, John said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I've got friends too. Friends in law enforcement, friends in the media, friends in places you can't even imagine. And if anything happens to these kids, to their driver, to anyone on this bus route, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who Tommy Vega is and what he does for fun. Tommy's confident expression faltered. He hadn't expected his threat to be turned back on him so effectively. John continued, stepping closer. But more than that, I want you to understand something about consequences. You thought you could terrorize people without anyone fighting back. You thought wrong. And every time you even think about doing something like this again, you're going to remember this moment. You're going to remember how easily your whole crew fell apart. You're going to remember how helpless you felt standing here alone. The sound of sirens in the distance began to reach their ears, growing steadily louder. Tommy's eyes darted toward the approaching sound, then back to John. The police are coming, John said matter-of-factly. Now you've got a choice to make. You can stick around and explain to them why there's a school bus with slashed tires and 8 weapons scattered on the road. Or you can gather up your boys and disappear, and maybe they'll have more important things to investigate. Tommy looked around at his crew. Some were already limping toward their motorcycles, eager to escape before the authorities arrived. Others were still sitting dazed on the asphalt, holding their heads or nursing injured limbs. But if you choose to run, John added, remember what I said about consequences. This protection doesn't end just because I ride away. These people are under my protection now, and I keep my promises. The sirens were getting closer. Red and blue lights began flickering through the trees in the distance. Tommy made his decision with the survival instincts of a career criminal. This isn't over, he growled, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Yeah, it is, John replied simply. It's over for you. It's over for your gang, and it's over for anyone who thinks they can terrorize innocent people in this county. Tommy began backing toward his motorcycle, calling out to his injured crew. Let's go. Move it. The bikers who could still ride helped those who couldn't, loading them onto bikes or supporting them as they stumbled toward their machines. The police cars came around the bend just as the last of the motorcycles roared to life. But instead of fleeing, the bikers sat idling their engines, waiting. John realized they were looking at him, waiting to see what he would do. He walked over to the nearest police car as it pulled to a stop. 2 officers got out, their hands resting cautiously on their service weapons as they surveyed the scene of broken weapons and damaged motorcycles. What happened here? The senior officer asked. John glanced back at the bikers, still waiting on their idling machines. Then he looked at the school bus, where children's faces were pressed against every window, and at Marcus Williams, who was gripping his steering wheel with shaking hands. Just a misunderstanding, John said calmly. I think it's been resolved. The officer looked skeptical, his eyes taking in the scattered weapons and the biker's injuries. But before he could ask more questions, Marcus Williams climbed down from the bus. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice steady despite everything he'd been through. "This man saved us. Those bikers had trapped the bus, slashed our tires, were threatening the children. He stood up to them when no one else could." The officer looked from Marcus to John to the waiting bikers. Something in John's calm demeanor and Marcus's grateful tone told him more than any official report could. "Are you pressing charges?" he asked Marcus. Marcus looked at the bikers, then at John, then at the children watching from the bus windows. "Not if they leave now and don't come back," he said quietly. John nodded to Tommy Vega one final time. The gang leader kick-started his motorcycle and roared away down the road, his crew following behind him like beaten dogs with their tails between their legs. The children in the bus burst into spontaneous applause and cheers. Through the windows, John could hear their voices calling out, "Thank you," and "You're awesome," and "Are you really John Cena?" For the first time since the confrontation began, John smiled. The police had finished taking statements and arranging for a tow truck to replace the slashed tires on the school bus. As the sun began to set, painting the country road in shades of gold and amber, the immediate crisis was over. But for everyone involved, the impact of what had transpired would last much longer. John stood beside his Harley-Davidson, watching as the last police car prepared to leave. Officer Sarah Martinez, the senior officer who had responded to the call, approached him with a mixture of professional curiosity and genuine gratitude. "You know, in 15 years of police work, I've never seen anything quite like this," she said, extending her hand. "Most people would have driven right past a situation like that. What made you stop?" John shook her hand firmly. "I have a niece about the same age as some of those kids," he replied simply. "I couldn't live with myself if something happened to them and I hadn't tried to help." Officer Martinez nodded, understanding completely. "Well, for what it's worth, you probably saved lives today. That gang has been terrorizing this area for months, but we could never get anyone to press charges. They were careful to target people who were too scared or too isolated to fight back." "What happens now?" John asked, glancing toward the school bus, where Marcus Williams was making final safety checks before resuming his route. "Now they're done," Martinez said with satisfaction. "Word's going to spread about what happened here. A gang that gets taken apart by one man doesn't have much credibility left on the street. My guess is they'll either disband or move on to easier territory." The bus engine started up, and Marcus Williams opened the door to wave at John. The sound of children's excited voices drifted across the evening air as they called out their thanks one more time. John walked over to the bus, and Marcus stepped down to meet him. The elderly driver's eyes were bright with unshed tears as he reached out to shake John's hand. "I don't know how to thank you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been driving this route for 37 years. I've seen a lot of things, dealt with a lot of situations, but I've never been that scared before. Not for myself, but for those kids." "You don't need to thank me," John replied. "You were doing your job, protecting those children. I just helped level the playing field." Marcus smiled, his grip tightening on John's hand. "My grandson is never going to believe this story. His grandmother won't either. John Cena saves school bus attack by bikers? Sounds like something out of a movie." "Maybe keep the details between us," John suggested with a grin. "The important thing is everyone's safe." From inside the bus, a small voice called out, "Mr. Cena! Mr. Cena!" It was Emma Rodriguez, the 7-year-old who had been crying against the window earlier. John approached the bus, and she pressed her face to the glass. "Are you really a superhero?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. John chuckled, remembering his earlier conversation with Tommy Vega about heroes and consequences. "No, sweetheart. I'm just a person who doesn't like bullies. But you know what? You don't need superpowers to be a hero. Sometimes you just need to care about other people and be willing to help when help is needed." An older boy, maybe 10 years old, raised his hand like he was in class. "Will you come back and visit our school?" "Maybe someday," John said. "But remember, The real heroes are people like Mr. Williams here, who takes care of you every day and makes sure you get home safely. And your teachers, and your parents, and all the people who work to make your lives better. Marcus climbed back into the driver's seat, but before closing the door, he handed John a piece of paper with his name and phone number. If you're ever in the area again, please call. My wife makes the best apple pie in the county, and it's the least we can do. John pocketed the paper. I might just take you up on that. As the school bus pulled away, continuing down the country road toward home, John watched until its taillights disappeared around a bend. The children's faces had been pressed to the rear window until the very last moment, waving and smiling. Officer Martinez, who had been finishing her paperwork in her patrol car, walked over to John one final time. You realize this story is going to spread, right? By tomorrow, half the county is going to know what happened here. John shrugged, pulling on his motorcycle helmet. Stories change in the telling. By next week, it'll probably be 20 bikers and a pack of wolves. Maybe, Martinez laughed. But the important parts will stay the same. The part about someone standing up for people who needed help. The part about good triumphing over evil. Those are the parts people remember. John started his Harley, the familiar rumble filling the evening air. Take care of yourself, Officer Martinez, and keep an eye on Marcus and his route, just in case. Will do, she promised. And John, thank you. Not just for what you did today, but for reminding us what it looks like when someone actually lives up to their principles. As John rode away down the country road, the setting sun at his back, he reflected on the events of the day. He'd started the afternoon looking for peace and solitude, a chance to escape the pressures of his public life. Instead, he'd found exactly the kind of situation that defined who he was at his core. In the weeks that followed, the story did indeed spread throughout the county and beyond. Marcus Williams became something of a local celebrity, invited to speak at community meetings about safety and courage. The children on his bus would remember that day for the rest of their lives, carrying with them the lesson that heroes could appear when least expected, and that standing up to bullies was always the right choice. The biker gang, as Officer Martinez had predicted, disbanded within a month. Some members moved away. Others found different ways to spend their time that didn't involve terrorizing innocent people. Tommy Vega himself was arrested 3 weeks later on outstanding warrants in another county, his reign of intimidation finally over. But perhaps the most important legacy of that afternoon was the conversation it started in communities across the region. People began talking about the responsibility to look out for one another, about the courage required to intervene when others were in danger, and about the difference one person could make when they chose to act rather than turn away. John Cena returned to his regular life, his demanding schedule, and his public appearances. But he carried with him the memory of children's faces pressed against bus windows, of an elderly driver's grateful handshake, and of a moment when being a hero meant simply being human. And somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, a school bus continued its daily route down quiet country roads, carrying precious cargo safely home, protected by the knowledge that someone had cared enough to stand up and fight when fighting was needed most.